On a warm July afternoon, 16-year-old Emily Carter set off on a short hike with friends in the pine-covered mountains. But by nightfall, only her friends returned. Emily had vanished. The initial belief among searchers was simple: a wrong turn, maybe a twisted ankle. Yet no tracks, no belongings, not even a single clue was ever found. 3 years later, mountaineers crossing a shifting glacier uncovered something locked in the ice. An eerie discovery that revealed Emily's fate was far darker and far stranger than anyone first imagined. The morning air shimmered with heat, a restless haze rising from the valley floor, as if the mountain itself was exhaling. That July day seemed ordinary, almost too ordinary. The kind of summer afternoon people forget by evening. Yet for Emily Carter, 16 years old and full of restless fire, it was a day that would mark the beginning of a story no one could ever explain. She leaned against the porch railing of her family's cabin, tying the laces of her worn hiking boots. Sunlight spilled across her shoulders, catching in strands of auburn hair that her mother always teased her about. "A flame you carry with you," she would say. Emily laughed easily. But this morning she was unusually quiet. Her father noticed. "You sure about this hike?" he asked, mug of coffee steaming in his hands. Emily glanced up, her eyes bright but distant. "It's just the ridge trail, Dad. We've done it a dozen times." Her younger brother Josh piped up from the steps. "You better bring me back a cool rock." Emily smirked. "Only if it has your name on it." That was the rhythm of her family, teasing, light-hearted, stitched together with ordinary words that would soon carry the weight of memory. By late morning, Emily and her friends gathered at the trailhead, backpacks slung over their shoulders, laughter echoing against the thick walls of pine. The forest swallowed sound in strange ways, one moment alive with bird calls, the next eerily still. The group didn't notice. They were 16, carefree, invincible. Emily, though, paused more than once. She had a habit of falling behind, not out of weakness but curiosity. She would stop to brush her fingers along the bark of cedar, crouch to study the delicate white flowers bursting between stones, or close her eyes to the steady rush of a stream somewhere below. "Come on, Em," one of her friends called, her voice carrying back down the trail. Emily waved them on. "I'm right here." But in truth, she wasn't. She lingered at the edge of the trail, eyes drifting toward the shadowy folds of the mountain where the light didn't seem to reach. For just a moment, she thought she saw movement deeper in the trees, too tall to be deer, too silent to be another hiker. She blinked, and it was gone. Her breath caught, but she said nothing. She adjusted the straps of her backpack, tightened her grip on the water bottle in her hand, and started forward again. The trail curved upward, and her friends disappeared one by one into the tree line, their voices muffled, fading. Emily slowed, the distance between her and them growing with every step, and then she stopped. The forest around her was unnervingly still. No wind moved the branches, no birds called, only the rasp of her own breathing filled the silence. Emily looked back down the trail, then forward into the trees where her friends had gone. For reasons she couldn't explain, her feet stayed rooted where she stood. When the group finally noticed she wasn't behind them, it was already too late. The forest swallowed her whole. As Emily stepped deeper into the trail, the air cooled, shadows thickening beneath the towering canopy of evergreens. The ground was damp from a storm the night before, every step releasing the earthy scent of pine needles and wet soil. Sunlight fractured through gaps in the branches, but here, in the hush of the mountain, the light seemed thin and hesitant, as though reluctant to intrude. The laughter of her friends carried faintly ahead, already fading into echoes. She adjusted the straps of her pack, listening not just to the faint chatter, but to the forest itself. The drip of water falling from branch to branch. The distant rush of a stream far below. Somewhere overhead, a raven croaked, its call startling in the stillness. "You coming?" a friend's voice shouted back, breaking the silence. "I'm right here," she called, quickening her pace, though her tone was lighter than she felt. Later, her friends would tell investigators she was only a few paces behind, that she stopped to snap a picture of the view. They remembered her pulling out her phone near the overlook, crouching to frame the jagged teeth of the ridgeline rising against a cloudless blue sky. It was a photo filled with light, her hair blowing across her face as she smiled into the wind. That image, time-stamped just after noon, would become the last clear evidence of Emily's presence on the trail. To the group, the hike carried no sense of danger. They joked about the steep incline, passing water bottles between them, stopping to take pictures of chipmunks darting across fallen logs. But one recalled hesitantly that Emily had seemed slower, more distracted than usual. She kept looking back, the friend told police, like she thought someone was behind us. The forest here had a way of playing tricks. One moment a branch cracked underfoot and seemed impossibly close. The next it was as though the trees had swallowed the sound before it reached you. The group pressed ahead, their voices bouncing through the canyon walls, until they rounded a bend where the trail narrowed between slabs of gray granite. When they looked back, Emily was gone. At first no one panicked. She was known for wandering off, for stopping to study flowers or trace the grooves of moss-covered bark with her fingers. "She'll catch up," someone said, and the group pressed on, expecting to hear her footsteps any second. But the seconds bled into minutes, and the minutes into a quiet unease. By the time they reached the final switchbacks down toward the trailhead, the sun was slipping westward, casting long shadows through the trees. The parking lot shimmered in the heat, their cars waiting like silent witnesses. But Emily was not there. They waited at first half an hour, maybe more, watching the mouth of the trail, expecting her to appear at any moment. Every snap of a branch, every shifting shadow made their heads turn. Nothing. Finally, one of the boys volunteered to jog back up the path. His footsteps pounded into silence as he retraced the route. When he returned, his face was pale. "She's not on the trail," he whispered. What none of them knew in that moment was that Emily had already vanished into the labyrinth of the mountain, her laughter swallowed, her footsteps erased, leaving behind only a single photograph on her phone. A frozen smile, a timestamp, and nothing else. The shadows reached the valley before anyone realized she was gone. By the time Emily's friends dialed her parents, the sun was sinking, its last light bleeding crimson across the jagged ridges. Down in the parking lot, engines idled, headlights flicked on, but the one person who should have walked out of the trees never came. The air grew cooler, the forest darker, and an ordinary summer hike had begun to take on the shape of a nightmare. At home, the Carter family phone rang just after 7:30 p.m. Emily's mother answered, her voice casual, expecting to hear her daughter's laughter. Instead, she was met with silence, broken only by the tremor in a teenager's voice. "This is Carter, we don't know where Emily is." The words hit like a stone dropped into water, first shock, then ripples of dread. Her mother pressed the phone tighter to her ear.
"What do you mean you don't know?"
"She was right behind us. She never came down." Within 20 minutes, her parents' car skidded into the gravel lot at the trailhead, headlights slicing through dust and shadow. Emily's father sprinted toward the path, calling her name into the trees. His voice carried echoing off canyon walls, but no reply came, only the low rustle of wind through the pines. At first, the explanation seemed simple. A wrong turn, a twisted ankle. Maybe she was waiting for them at one of the switchbacks. The forest was vast, but not endless, and the trail was marked. Emily was resourceful, tough. Surely she was out there, crouched beneath a tree, waiting. That night, a local search and rescue team assembled flashlights bobbing in the dark, radios crackling with static. Volunteers moved in staggered lines, their beams slicing the blackness, their voices calling into the void. "Emily, Emily, can you hear us?" The shouts bounced back emptily. The woods had a strange way of silencing sound. Rescuers later recalled how their voices seemed to vanish only a few feet away, as if the forest swallowed them whole. Even the dogs, trained to follow scent trails, seemed uneasy. Their low growls carried beneath the steady beat of helicopter blades circling overhead. The first theory was injury, a twisted ankle, a fall, a moment of panic. The rescuers combed drainage gullies and brush-choked ravines, expecting to find her huddled in the shadows, frightened but alive, but every path, every outcropping of stone, led to nothing. By midnight, the Carter family stood at the base of the trail, exhaustion carving lines into their faces. Emily's mother clutched her daughter's jacket, left in the car, holding it as though it might tether her to the missing girl. Her father spoke in low bursts to the sheriff, his jaw clenched tight, his eyes scanning the black tree line. "Could she have gone off trail?" someone asked. "She knows better," her father replied. But even as he said it, the doubt crept in. When dawn came, pale and gray, the forest revealed no trace, no footprints in the mud, no scraps of clothing torn on branches, not even a water bottle or backpack dropped in panic. The trail was untouched, as if Emily had stepped off it and dissolved into the air. Then came the dogs. Around noon, handlers released them near the ridge. Their noses pressed to the ground, eager, determined, until suddenly they stopped. One whined, pawing at the rocky outcropping where the trail narrowed. Another sat abruptly, as though the scent had simply vanished. Rescuers exchanged uneasy glances. "What does it mean?" Emily's mother asked, her voice brittle. The handler shook his head. "It means she was here, and then she wasn't." The ridge loomed above them, jagged and indifferent, while the forest below stretched into endless shadow. Somewhere in that silence, Emily had disappeared, and the mountain was keeping its secret. The morning after Emily vanished, the mountain was no longer just a trailhead for weekend hikers, it was a crime scene draped in silence. Uniformed officers stood at the base of the path, clipboards in hand, listening as teenagers stumbled through retellings of the hike. Their voices cracked with exhaustion, guilt, and fear. Each tried to remember every detail, but the stories never quite aligned. "She was right behind us," one insisted. "No," another corrected, rubbing their eyes. "She stopped to take a picture, then we didn't see her again." "But I thought she said she'd meet us at the bend." The contradictions piled up like stones. Some swore she was smiling, carefree. Others said she looked distracted, pausing often to glance over her shoulder. The smallest details, a laugh, a glance, a few extra steps, now carried the weight of life and death. Detectives leaned in, pressing for precision. What color was her shirt? Did she carry her phone in her hand or tuck it into her pack? When exactly did they last hear her voice? No one agreed. Memory, under stress, fractured into unreliable fragments. While investigators struggled with shifting testimonies, locals in the nearby town whispered their own recollections. Several hikers, interviewed at the ranger station, claimed they had noticed something unusual on the mountain that day. A man, one woman said firmly, tall, wearing a dark jacket even though it was too warm, just standing there, off the trail, watching. Another recalled movement between the trees, two figures where there should have been none, yet no names, no descriptions matched with anyone officially logged on the trail registry. Whoever they were, if they had been there at all, they had left no trace. Searchers, combing every ridge and ravine, found only the stubborn emptiness of the mountain. No water bottle, no shoe print, no fragment of torn fabric caught on a branch. Even her phone, last pinged somewhere along the trail, was gone. To Emily's parents, this absence was unbearable. Her mother gripped the officer's arms, her voice rising with desperation. "Where are her things? You don't just disappear without leaving something behind. Something has to be out there." But the detectives had no answer. By evening, rumors spread faster than official updates. Some believed Emily had been taken, dragged into the woods by someone lurking in the shadows. Others insisted she must have slipped and fallen, her body hidden somewhere in the jagged ravines. And then there were those who spoke of the mountain itself, how it had a way of keeping secrets, of swallowing the lost. That night, as search parties pushed deeper into the canyons with lanterns and dogs, one hiker reported something unsettling. Standing on a high ridge, he swore he heard a sound drift up from the depths below. At first faint, carried by the wind, a cry. Not an animal, not the groan of shifting rock. A human voice, high, fragile, and fading. "Help?" The rescuers scrambled to locate the source, leaning over the cliff edge with flashlights. But the canyon below was black, a pit of shadow and silence. When the wind shifted, The voice was gone. And once again the mountain gave nothing back. The mountain awoke to the sound of rotor blades. At first light, helicopters carved slow circles above the ridges, their searchlights sweeping across jagged granite and dense forests. The roar echoed through the canyons, a constant mechanical hum that warred against the silence that had devoured Emily Carter. Below, the ground swelled with people, uniformed rescuers, deputies, and strangers who had driven for hours just to help. By mid-morning, more than 100 volunteers lined the trail, their neon jackets flashing like bright sparks against the green-black woods. Emily's parents stood at the base of it all, their faces pale, drained, but unwilling to leave. Her mother gripped a folded map in trembling hands, her thumb pressed hard into the spot where Emily had last been seen. She had not slept, she would not eat. When an officer gently suggested that she return home to rest, her response was sharp and immediate. "No, my daughter is here. If she's out there, I'm staying until she comes back." Her father said little, but his silence was heavy. His eyes fixed on the ridgeline. He carried Emily's jacket over his arm, holding it as if it contained her warmth. Searchers fanned out in staggered grids. The helicopters hovered low, kicking dust into the trees. On the ground, men and women moved in single-file lines, calling her name every few steps. Emily, Emily Carter. Their voices lifted, fractured by wind, and vanished into the forest. The toll of waiting grew unbearable, each hour stretched thin with dread. Emily's mother walked with one of the teams, her voice hoarse from shouting. At one point, she broke down, clutching at the arm of a ranger. "She's not gone, she wouldn't leave me. I know she's still alive." The ranger looked away, his silence carrying more weight than any words could. Rumors surfaced as quickly as search parties. Some claimed a driver on a nearby road had seen a girl matching Emily's description hours after she vanished. Others insisted a lone hiker spotted a flash of red fabric deeper in the forest. Each report sent rescuers sprinting, their radios alive with urgency. But every lead collapsed into nothing. No footprints, no trail, no girl. Investigators chased theories with growing desperation. One deputy muttered to another as they scanned a rocky gulch, "It's like she was lifted off the ground." The other shook his head. "No trace means foul play. Someone took her." But there was no proof, just speculation, filling the silence that Emily had left behind. By the third day, exhaustion clung to the search like fog. Helicopters burned fuel through long, futile flights. Dogs circled endlessly, their handlers frustrated by scents that began strong but ended suddenly as though erased. Volunteers stumbled back into camp with blistered feet and hollow eyes. And still, Emily's mother remained. She stood at the mouth of the trail at dusk, her figure lit by the setting sun, whispering to the trees as though her daughter might hear, "Come home, baby, just come home." That night, as searchers regrouped, the weather turned. Dark clouds rolled over the ridges, swallowing the last light. The wind rose, cold and sharp, carrying the metallic scent of rain. Within hours, the mountain was engulfed in storm. Sheets of water pounded the ground. Rivers tore down the gullies, and then came the snow, heavy, sudden, unnatural, for July. It smothered the landscape in a white shroud, burying the trail beneath a fresh, pristine layer. Rescuers stood helpless as evidence. Footprints, broken branches, any fragile trace of where Emily might have gone disappeared beneath the storm. By dawn, the mountain looked untouched, silent once more. Whatever secrets it had held were now sealed under snow. The mountain did not give her back. For days, then weeks, and eventually months, the search thinned. The helicopters left first, their thunder fading until the sky was quiet again. Volunteers dwindled. The makeshift command post at the trailhead was packed up, its tents and radios taken away, but the Carters remained. Each morning, Emily's parents returned to the base of the mountain with maps in hand, their eyes hollow, their voices raw. They would not allow silence to be the final word. By the end of that first summer, vigils lit the small town below, candles flickered in paper cups, hands held tight against the night air. Photographs of Emily lined the church steps, her smiling face taped to poster boards, her name scrawled in black ink across signs that read, "Bring her home." Friends from school spoke in choked voices, recalling her laugh, her love for drawing, her restless curiosity. Her mother sat among them, motionless, clutching Emily's scarf to her chest. But hope has a fragile half-life. By the second summer, the vigils were smaller, fewer candles burned. People shifted their attention, lives pulled forward by the weight of time, and though the community still spoke her name, it was no longer with certainty. It was with questions. The theories spread like wildfire. Some whispered she had been abducted, taken by a stranger who used the mountain as cover. Others suggested she had run away, seeking a new life beyond the horizon. The darkest rumors hinted at something stranger. A secluded group rumored to camp in the wilderness. A cult hidden in the forests that might have claimed her. Each story was a grasp at explanation, a way to tame the unbearable fact that a girl could vanish so completely. Emily's father refused to surrender to whispers. He spent nights hunched over topographic maps spread across the dining table, tracing routes with a trembling finger. Every ravine, every unmarked gulch became an obsession. He circled areas in red ink, muttering to himself, "We missed something. She's there. She has to be there." His hands grew calloused from endless hikes, his boots worn thin. Yet every trail ended in silence. His wife, meanwhile, drifted into quiet grief. She began speaking to Emily's room as though her daughter might walk through the door. "I kept your things just how you left them," she whispered once, folding the blankets tighter on the bed. "If you come home, it'll all still be here." Years stretched thin. The mountain grew colder each winter, greener each spring, and still no trace emerged. Police reports gathered dust, search files buried in cabinets. Officially the case was open. In truth, it was fading. But not for everyone. Late in the third summer, a pair of hikers climbing near a glacier made a peculiar report. They had stopped to rest when they noticed something unnatural in the landscape. Along a stretch of ice just beyond the marked trail stood a cluster of stones, small cairns stacked deliberately, balanced in ways the wind could not have managed. Not one or two, dozens. Some arranged in rows, others forming a crude circle. The hikers swore the rocks looked freshly placed, their edges free of snow or moss. There were no footprints around them, no sign of who had made them or why. When they pointed it out to a ranger days later, the formations were gone. The cairns had been scattered, toppled, as if someone or something had erased them. The glacier was alive with sound, groaning, shifting, whispering, as ancient ice inched imperceptibly down the mountainside. To the climbers ascending that summer morning, the air felt sharp and brittle, each breath stinging their lungs with cold. Their crampons bit into the frozen surface, the crunch echoing against walls of ice that shimmered in fractured blues and silvers. Above them, the sun burned bright, but here, on the glacier, heat was an illusion. Every step was taken with caution, every rope taut with unspoken fear of what lay beneath. They had not come seeking answers. For them, it was just another climb. A test of strength, endurance, the thrill of standing on untouched ground. The mountain loomed, as it always had, indifferent to the people who scaled its skin. But somewhere deep in the glacier's frozen veins, something waited, buried and silent. Halfway across a jagged section, one of the climbers slipped. His boots scraped the ice, sending a hollow crack spiraling outward. He caught himself quickly, rope snapping taut, but the stumble dislodged a section of snow. A sheet slid away, tumbling down the slope, and beneath it, caught in the frozen glass of the glacier, was something unnatural. At first, it looked like fabric, red, dull with age, pressed flat beneath the ice. The climbers gathered around, their axes tapping cautiously against the surface. The ice was clouded, but just visible beneath it was the curve of something pale. A hand. Fingers curled, skin waxen, trapped in a gesture that seemed both frozen and pleading. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the low moan of shifting ice and the whistle of wind threading through crevices. Finally, one of them whispered, almost to himself,
"God, that's a person."
The climbers knelt, peering closer. They could see more now, a sleeve, torn and stiff, and a faint outline of a shoulder. It was a body, pressed flat against the glacier's belly, preserved by the cold. One of them pulled back abruptly, shaking his head. "We need to call this in, now." Another hesitated, staring down at the hand. "How long do you think it's been here?" The first climber's voice trembled. "Doesn't matter. Whoever it is, they've been waiting for us." The call crackled over radios to the ranger station. Words stumbled out, broken by shock. We found someone, in the ice. It's human." By late afternoon, officials had roped off the section of Glacier. Rangers stood grim-faced, as specialists prepared to cut into the frozen sheet. The climbers waited nearby, their voices hushed, their eyes still drawn back to the outline beneath the ice. None of them had expected this climb to end with a corpse staring up at them through a window of glass. As the team chipped carefully into the ice, more details emerged. A jacket sleeve, faded but intact. The curve of a face, half buried, hair frozen into the glacier like strands of copper wire, and most haunting of all, the position of the body, not sprawled as though fallen, but twisted, arms curled, as if the person had been trying to shield themselves from something. One ranger muttered under his breath, words carried only to the nearest ear. "This isn't just a hiker who fell." By the time evening descended, the recovery team had exposed enough to confirm what they already suspected. The remains were too fresh to be ancient, too preserved to belong to anyone but someone lost in recent years. For the Carters, waiting miles below in the town, the phone call came like a blade. Officials did not say much, only that a body had been found in the glacier, that belongings nearby suggested it could be Emily. Her mother's knees gave way before the sentence was even finished. Her father gripped the counter, knuckles white, the map he had studied for 3 summers slipping from his hand. On the mountain, the glacier groaned again as though in protest, its ice shifting to close the wound left by the recovery. And when the last of the rescuers left for the night, the body remained half-embedded, one hand still reaching outward as if it had been trying to claw its way free from the ice. It was Emily, or what was left of her. The glacier gave her back in pieces. When recovery teams returned the following morning, the mountain had settled into a deceptive calm. Sunlight glittered on the frozen expanse, casting the ice in a brilliant glow, as if to disguise the darkness entombed within it. Beneath layers chipped away through the night, the body of Emily Carter was finally revealed, partially preserved. Eerily lifelike, suspended in a state between life and decay. Her arm, bent at an unnatural angle, was stretched outward, palm turned upward as though reaching for something. Her body was twisted, not fallen, not sprawled, but curled sideways as though she had resisted, struggled, or shielded herself. The ice had frozen her struggle mid-motion, preserving her fear in silence. The recovery was slow, methodical. Chainsaws whined against blocks of ice, steam rising in bursts as warm water was used to separate flesh from frozen stone. Every fragment exposed raised new questions. Her jacket sleeve was torn, edges frayed as though pulled by force. Beneath her body, pressed flat against the ice, was a small pendant on a broken chain. A delicate silver charm shaped like a bird. It belonged to her mother, given to Emily on her 16th birthday, just weeks before she vanished. One ranger held it up carefully, his gloves trembling. "She still had it," he said quietly, the words hanging heavy in the air. Nearby, recovery teams uncovered tatters of fabric embedded in the ice strips that didn't seem to match her clothing, different colors, thicker material, something that looked more like a man's jacket than a teenager's. The pieces were small, ragged, as though torn in a struggle. No one could say for certain how they came to rest beside her. The remains were airlifted to the county coroner, sealed in a body bag that looked far too final. For Emily's parents, the call confirmed what they had feared for 3 years, yet prayed they would never hear. Their daughter was gone, but the manner of her discovery only deepened the nightmare. The autopsy was fraught with difficulty. The preservation of the body in ice had kept her features disturbingly intact, but it also made examination treacherous. Tissue shattered under tools, organs had frozen solid. Pathologists spoke in measured tones. Hypothermia was likely, but not certain. Blunt force trauma was suggested, but the frozen fractures made interpretation impossible, and yet there were marks. Abrasions along her wrists, faint but visible, that raised grim possibilities. Investigators sat around the table with photographs spread before them. One image showed her hand, curled tightly as though she had been gripping something in her final moments. Another showed her body's positioning, twisted in a way that didn't align with a simple fall. "Look at her arm," one detective muttered. "That's not how you land in an accident, that's how you fight." The room fell silent. The torn fabric was bagged as evidence, but analysis led nowhere. DNA degraded, fibers too weathered. No matches appeared in the system. The pendant, though deeply personal, revealed nothing new beyond its grim survival. And yet, one chilling observation kept surfacing. If Emily had slipped into the glacier alone, her belongings, her backpack, her phone, her water bottle, should have been nearby. But they weren't. Nothing of hers, except her body and the pendant, had been found. A ranger voiced the thought everyone else tried not to say aloud. Maybe she didn't fall here. Maybe she was brought here. The words sat like a stone in the room. Because if true, it meant Emily's final moments had not been a tragic accident of nature, but the consequence of something or someone far darker. That theory gained a haunting weight when a final detail emerged. In the preserved ice around her, faint scratches were found etched into the frozen wall, near where her hand had rested. Lines gouged shallowly, inconsistent, overlapping like frantic claw marks. They were too unclear to decipher, but investigators couldn't dismiss the implication. Emily had been alive, struggling against the ice, long enough to leave behind a trace of her desperation. And more than that, analysis revealed some of the scratches had been made by something larger than human fingernails. Something else had scraped against the ice near her. Which meant, in her final moments, Emily Carter had not been alone. The mountain does not care for truth. It only echoes theories, scattering them like loose stones down a canyon wall. When Emily's remains were pulled from the glacier, investigators gathered in hushed rooms to debate her death. Some clung to the simplest explanation, hypothermia. The mountain was merciless, the temperatures brutal even in summer. Perhaps she had wandered off trail, grown disoriented, succumbed to the cold. Her body, sliding with meltwater, may have been swallowed by the ice. It was logical. It was clean. It was almost comforting. But others couldn't reconcile that story with what the evidence revealed. She wasn't sprawled out, one detective argued, pointing at photographs of her twisted posture. She was curled, defensive. And the wrist abrasions, another added. Those don't come from cold. Those come from restraint. The room fell silent. No one wanted to admit what that implied. Beyond official walls, the locals filled in the void with their own stories. In the diner at the edge of town, hunters spoke of a man who lived deep in the woods. They called him the Hermit. No one knew his name, but some swore they'd seen the smoke of a campfire curling above a ridge. A figure moving silently through the trees. Too tall, too lean, eyes reflecting like an animal's in the dark. Maybe she crossed him, a waitress whispered. Maybe she wasn't the first. Others dismissed the legend as mountain folklore, an easy way to explain the unexplainable. But the timing of the rumors was unsettling. The summer Emily vanished. Several hikers had reported strange encounters, the feeling of being watched, the sound of footsteps pacing their own, a shadow that disappeared when they turned. And then came the red herrings. Twice in the months after her disappearance, towns across the state reported sightings of a girl who resembled Emily. A gas station clerk swore he saw her with an older man, her face pale, her eyes darting nervous. A woman in a roadside diner claimed she recognized her instantly, the auburn hair, the sharp laugh. Each sighting brought hope that she was alive, taken but still out there. But both leads dissolved. Security footage revealed nothing. Witness descriptions crumbled under scrutiny. The supposed Emily was always someone else, a stranger passing through. Each false lead struck her parents like a cruel blow, hope given, only to be snatched away. Still, the whispers lingered. Some insisted she had been abducted and moved far beyond the mountain. Others suggested she had chosen to leave, crafting her own disappearance. But Emily's family rejected that outright. She wouldn't run, her mother said firmly. Not from us. Not from her brother. She didn't leave. She was taken. Back at the coroner's office, the body told a story of its own. though fractured and difficult to read. The cold had preserved her too well, hiding the truth in frost. But one discovery stood out: injuries that didn't align with a simple fall. Her shoulder bore a fracture consistent with blunt force, something heavy striking from above, not the chaotic break of tumbling through rock. The abrasions along her wrists hinted at pressure, not accident, and most unsettling of all, the pattern of bruising along her ribs suggested impact with something flat, deliberate, not jagged stone. The findings drew the investigators back to the same unspoken question. If Emily did not fall into the glacier by chance, then who, or what, put her there? Grief had hollowed her, but it had not broken her. While investigators filed reports and buried Emily's case beneath a mountain of unsolved paperwork, her mother refused to surrender. To officials, Emily was evidence. To the world, she was a headline gone stale. But to her mother, she was still a daughter, still the girl who laughed too loud, who left her sketches scattered across the dining table, who wore the silver bird pendant as though it tethered her to home. And no matter how many times police insisted the case had reached its natural end, she demanded more. "I don't want maybes," she snapped one afternoon in the sheriff's office. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the room reeking faintly of coffee and old paper. Her fists trembled as they pressed into the desk. "I want answers. My daughter didn't just wander into the ice and die. Someone knows something. And you," her voice cracked, "you aren't looking hard enough." The sheriff's eyes were weary. His voice measured. "Mrs. Carter, we've exhausted every lead. We've brought in search teams, dogs, helicopters. I understand your pain, but there's nothing more to find." Her laugh was hollow, sharp, edged with fury. "There's always more to find. You just stopped looking." That night she sat in Emily's room, staring at the mural her daughter had once painted on the wall, swirling mountains in soft blues and purples, a sun spilling across the horizon. In the quiet, memories pressed in. Emily at 5, chasing fireflies with bare feet in the backyard. Emily at 10, curled in a blanket fort, whispering stories to her little brother by flashlight. Emily at 16, her smile wide as she unwrapped the silver pendant her mother had given her, saying, "Now you'll always know where I am." Her mother's hands trembled as she clutched the empty chain that had been returned to her from the glacier, its clasp broken. Weeks later, when police shut the door for good, she opened another. A private detective, hired with money scraped together from family and friends, arrived with a battered notebook and eyes that had seen too much. He listened to her story without interruption, then asked only one question. "If we go down this road, you have to be ready for what we find. Are you ready?" She didn't hesitate. "I was ready the moment they told me she was gone." The detective retraced the case from the beginning. He walked the trail where Emily was last seen, his boots grinding against gravel that had long since lost her footsteps. He interviewed the climbers who had found her in the ice, probing for details overlooked in shock. He spread out maps of the glacier, comparing seasonal shifts, noting where ice melt might reveal what had been hidden. And in the third week of his work he found something. Near the edge of the glacier, where rivulets of water trickled in the summer thaw, a local hiker had reported odd debris surfacing, scraps of fabric, a rusted canteen, fragments pressed flat by ice. The detective made the trip himself, crouching in the cold mud at the glacier's base, his gloved fingers pulling through stones and meltwater. There, half buried in silt, he uncovered a scrap of paper, waterlogged, edges frayed, words smudged but not erased. It was a page, torn from a diary. And at the top, written in shaky ink that had blurred but endured, was Emily's handwriting. The words were fragmented, incomplete, but one line was still visible. A single sentence, chilling in its simplicity. "He's still watching me." The detective stared at it for a long time, the ice cracking softly in the distance, meltwater dripping like the tick of a clock. If the diary was hers, then Emily's final days had not been lived alone. The page from the diary was more than a fragment. It was a confession, a warning written in the shaky hand of a girl who had already felt the shadow closing in. "He's still watching me." Those 4 words ignited a fire that investigators had long tried to smother. If Emily had written them in the days leading up to her disappearance, then what happened on that mountain was no accident. Someone had been following her, tracking her steps long before the hike began. Her mother pressed the diary scrap flat beneath glass, her hands trembling. "She told someone, she must have told someone," she whispered. "Why didn't they listen?" That question became a blade aimed at the police, and soon the truth bled out. In the months before Emily vanished, she had confided in friends about a man who sometimes appeared near her route home from school. He never spoke, never approached, but his presence lingered, standing across the street, waiting at the bus stop, leaning against a lamppost. She joked nervously about it once at a sleepover, saying, "I swear he's everywhere I go." One friend admitted she told her parents. The parents, in turn, had contacted authorities. A vague report was filed: possible stalking, teenage female, unknown male. No follow-up was ever made. When pressed on this, a detective shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "We didn't have a name. We didn't have a description solid enough to act on. And kids exaggerate sometimes. We didn't think it was credible." Emily's mother slammed her hand against the table. She was begging for help. "And you called it exaggeration." The room went silent. While the private investigator chased paper trails, Emily's father returned to the mountain with a different plan. Trail cameras, usually used by hunters to track wildlife, had been scattered through the forest that summer. He requested access, and after weeks of silence, a ranger reluctantly handed over the files. Night after night, he sat in the dim glow of his computer, clicking through hundreds of still frames: deer, elk, hikers, bears, mundane flashes of wilderness life. But then, in one set of images taken just weeks before Emily disappeared, he saw it. In the corner of the frame, half hidden by the trees, stood a man. Tall, thin, a hood drawn tight over his head despite the summer heat, his face obscured by shadow, but his posture unmistakable, angled toward the camera, as if he knew it was there. Emily's father leaned forward, his heart pounding. In the next frame, the man was gone. No sound, no blur of motion, just absence. When he showed the photo to the sheriff, the official explanation was cautious. Could be a hiker, could be a trick of the light. But to a father who had studied the mountain for 3 years, there was no doubt. "That's him," he whispered. "That's the one who followed her." The detective pressed for more. The ranger station held additional cameras, some placed along the very ridge where Emily was last seen. The footage was grainy, time-stamped, hours of still shots captured over weeks. Scrolling through them was like staring into the mountain's memory. On the morning of Emily's hike, the cameras showed ordinary hikers, groups of friends moving along the switchbacks, families pausing for photographs. Then, at 11:47 a.m., the camera caught something chilling. Emily. She appeared in the frame, smiling faintly, her hair blown by the wind, her backpack slung tight across her shoulders. Her friends were ahead, their shapes blurred but visible. Emily was alone for only seconds, captured mid-step, her head turned slightly over her shoulder, as though she'd heard something behind her. The next frame, time-stamped 11:48, showed only the trees, and the one after that. Darkness. The camera had cut out. Abruptly, inexplicably. Its battery, checked later, was full. Its memory card intact. Yet the recording from that day ended at the precise moment Emily vanished from view. The silence in the room when that footage played was suffocating. The detective leaned back slowly, his jaw tight. Emily's father buried his face in his hands. Her mother whispered the words she had carried for years. "He was there. I knew he was there." Theories multiplied in the wake of the footage. Sabotage. A technical failure. Or something far darker, someone deliberately tampering with the evidence. The trail camera had been positioned to see what happened next, to capture the truth of where Emily had gone. Instead, it had gone blind at the very moment she stepped out of frame. And what lay in the missing seconds between her last photograph and the void of the recording would remain forever unseen. The truth sealed, once again, by the mountain's silence. The report landed with a dull thud, a stack of papers that claimed to contain answers but offered only silence. 3 years of searching, 3 summers of grief, climbers stumbling upon her frozen form, the diary scrap, the camera footage, all of it condensed into an official conclusion: cause of death, undetermined. Likely environmental exposure. It was the word likely that broke Emily's mother. She sat at the kitchen table, the document spread in front of her, her eyes burning over the language crafted to conceal uncertainty. Her husband stood at the counter, fists pressed against the wood, his jaw clenched so tightly the veins rose along his neck. "This," he whispered, "this is what 3 years buys us." "Likely?" Her voice cracked. "They've buried her twice, first in the ice, now in words." The sheriff's office released the report to the public days later. At the press conference, cameras flashed as officials stood under fluorescent lights, their ties stiff, their voices colder than the mountain air that had taken Emily. "Evidence suggests hypothermia as a primary cause," the sheriff recited, reading from the page. "No conclusive indication of foul play. The case will remain open pending further information." But the words felt hollow, an echo in a room that demanded thunder. In the town below the mountain, conversations fractured. At the gas station, voices rose between customers. "She wandered off." "Tragic, but that's all," one man insisted, slamming his change on the counter. "Don't be stupid," another snapped. "She was stalked." "Everyone knows about that hermit, or did you miss the diary page?" The diner buzzed with theories. Was the torn fabric proof of a struggle, or just debris the Glacier had carried down from elsewhere? Was the figure on the trail camera a predator, or only a hiker lost in the blur of shadow? For some, accepting accident was easier. For others, denying foul play felt like betraying the truth Emily herself had written: "He's still watching me." At home, the Carters refused to let the report close their daughter's story. Emily's father sat with maps still scattered across the dining table, his eyes glazed, his pen circling the same ridges again and again. "They're wrong," he muttered. "They didn't look close enough. They didn't listen." Her mother paced the room, restless. She replayed conversations with detectives in her mind, every time she had been dismissed, every warning ignored. Her fury grew sharper with every memory. "They knew," she hissed. She told them she was being followed, and they did nothing. The bitterness spread to her voice in public meetings, her words laced with grief and fire. "Don't tell me my daughter died from cold. She was chased into that mountain. And until someone proves otherwise, I will not stop." The officials shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, unwilling to answer. In the weeks following the report, the case slipped once again into the fog of unsolved mysteries. News outlets stopped calling, volunteers stopped visiting. The mountain stood quiet, its slopes green again under summer sun, as though nothing had ever happened. But the silence did not soothe. It cut deeper. In the Carter household, Emily's presence lingered like a shadow. Her room remained untouched, her drawings pinned to the walls, her shoes waiting by the door. At night, her mother sometimes thought she heard footsteps on the stairs, light, quick, the way Emily used to climb when she didn't want to wake anyone. One evening, after the house had gone still, her mother stood at the window, staring toward the dark outline of the mountain. She whispered into the glass, her breath fogging the pain. "This isn't over, Emily, I promise you. Your case isn't closed." And in the silence that followed, it felt just for a moment as though someone else was listening. The mountain never forgot her. Years after Emily Carter's body was pulled from the glacier, hikers still spoke of her presence, of a girl whose voice lingered in the wind, whose absence could still be felt in the spaces where the trees grew unnervingly still. The case had been shelved, the files filed away, but the story refused to settle. It clung to the ridges, seeping into the soil and the ice, as though the mountain itself had been branded by what it had consumed. On quiet evenings, when the trail emptied and the sun bled crimson against the granite peaks, some hikers claimed to hear it. A voice, faint, high, almost childlike, threading through the canyon. "Help!" The first to report it was a pair of backpackers camping near the glacier. They woke to the sound of crying carried on the wind, thin and desperate, drifting across the ice. They searched with headlamps, calling out, but no one answered. The next morning, they descended, shaken, swearing they'd hurt a girl. They weren't the last. Over the years, dozens came forward, Some described sobbing. Others heard a single word repeated, vanishing before they could make it out. Rangers dismissed it as imagination, wind whistling through cracks in the ice, the mountain's natural song. But those who heard it never forgot. The voice, they said, felt too human, too deliberate. And then came the carvings. In late summer, a group of climbers resting near the glacier noticed something etched into a slab of rock, half hidden by lichen. At first, they thought it was graffiti, but as they leaned closer, their breath caught initials, carved deep into stone, the lines jagged, uneven, as though scratched in desperation. Nearby, more faint etchings crossed the surface, indecipherable, half erased by weather, but one phrase could still be read.
Not alone.
The climbers reported it, but by the time rangers arrived days later, rain had washed the letters shallow, blurring their edges. Officially, it could not be linked to Emily. Unofficially, it became another whisper in the story of a girl who had vanished too completely to leave behind only silence. Emily's case became one of many in a long, grim catalog of disappearances in the wilderness. Her name was spoken alongside others: hikers lost without trace, campers gone from zip tents, climbers swallowed by storms. Each story carried the same hollow refrain: no closure, no certainty, no answers. Experts pointed to the brutality of the elements: cold, hunger, disorientation. Others leaned toward human threats, predators who used the remoteness as cover. But in each case, the truth blurred. Just as with Emily, the line between accident and foul play dissolved into fog. Her story came to symbolize that uncertainty. For her community, she was no longer just a girl. She was the question no one could answer, the embodiment of the wilderness's power to take and to hide. For her family, though, she was still Emily. Her father continued to hike the trail every year on the anniversary of her disappearance. He left flowers at the ridge, arranging them carefully on the stone where the search dogs had stopped years before. Sometimes he stayed until night fell, the stars scattering across the black sky, his breath clouding in the chill. He said little on those hikes, except for the words he always whispered at the summit: "I found you once. I'll find the rest." Her mother turned grief into a vow. She spoke at vigils for missing persons, warning that cases like Emily's were never rare, never isolated. "The wilderness holds too many stories," she told the crowds. "Don't let them fade. Don't let them be buried in reports that say likely." Emily's younger brother grew quiet, carrying his sister's absence like a shadow that stretched with him into adulthood. He kept her drawings, framed them on his wall, reminders of the sister who should have lived to see more summers. And still, the question haunted them. On that bright July afternoon, when Emily lingered behind her friends, what had she seen? Was it simply the mountain? The lure of beauty, the pull of curiosity that drew her off the trail? Or had she heard the footsteps she'd written about, the shadow that had watched her for weeks? Was she running toward the ridgeline, searching for her friends? Or was she running away from something that did not belong in the forest, something that had followed her until the mountains swallowed her whole? The official report left the world with a hollow word: undetermined. But those who knew her, who walked the trail where her laughter once echoed, believed otherwise. Because even years later, when the wind rises and the glacier groans, some swear they can still hear her voice carried through the canyons. A cry not just for help, but for the truth.